Hey guys, so I'm here to go over the final phone call in chapter 3, and that is to Bill Denbrough, Stuttering Bill. Just like the other ones, it doesn't really go over too much of his childhood. It just kind of goes into his adult life and kind of what's going on when Mike calls to let him know that it has come back. Bill is living in England with his wife Audra. They've been married for 11 years. As you know, Bill is a famous horror writer, and he and his wife met on the set of one of the movies that was being done of his book. She was the lead actress, and he was doing the screenplay. So a lot of people didn't think their relationship would work out because she's 5 years older, and she was very stunning, and him, even though he was 5 years younger than her, kind of looked like a middle-aged man. But they proved them wrong, and at the time of this phone call, they've been married for 11 years. It kind of goes back into when he went to college, and he got a scholarship to go to a university, and he got in this hoity-toity English class, and he was getting a lot of bad grades, C's, D's, F's, only because the teacher was kind of like a poet or whatever. And it was the 70s, so everything had to have a meaning, you know, peace, love, war kind of stuff. And he didn't feel the same way. He felt everything had to be, it's just a story, it's just a story. But for them, they wanted to dissect everything, and since he didn't really fall in line with that, he often got bad grades. And he even had an outburst at one point after an hour of them all debating on the meaning of a story. He got up and said, why can't a story just be a story? And the teacher told him, well, you've got a lot to learn. In which the whole class like erupted in applause like good little sheep. And Bill left the class, but because he's not a quitter, he went back. In the meantime, though, he was writing a book or a short story called The Dark, and this kind of tells a little bit about that. Bill leaves, but returns the next week, determined to stick with it. In the time between, he has written a story called The Dark, a tale about a small boy who discovers a monster in the cellar of his house. The little boy faces it, battles it, and finally kills it. If someone had suggested to him that he was really writing about his brother George, he would have been surprised. He's not thought about George in years, or so he honestly believes. So, I found that kind of interesting, that he was writing about little Georgie, and he, basically, little Georgie went into the basement, or the cellar, in chapter 1, and he did not defeat the monster. But in Bill's story, The Dark, he did. So I thought that was pretty telling, is that, you know, even though he doesn't really remember George, he kind of remembers part of it. And he submits it to the teacher, and the teacher gives it back to him with crap written on it, you know, C-R-A-P, that the work was crap, and gives him an F. And Bill goes home, and he's about to burn it, when he decides to, instead to submit it to a men's magazine. And they buy horror stories. So he submitted it there, and he ended up selling it for $200. I think that part in the story kind of reminds me of like when Stephen King was going to give up on Carrie, and he chucked it into the trash, and his wife Tabitha picked it up and told him to keep going with it. And if she hadn't told him to keep going with it, I mean, we might not have no Stephen King, you know. So I think that's part of his little thing when that is mentioned, is that he was about to burn it, and instead he submitted it. You know, he kept going and he submitted it. The magazine printed it, sent him a congratulations letter and all that. So he decides to go drop out of the English class and staples the congratulations letter to it. And the teacher sends him in the mail his grade card with a big fat F on it, and still says, you think money means everything. Because he also wrote on there, you've got a lot to learn. That's what Bill had written on the drop card with his congratulations letter. So Bill was kind of like a little badass, you know. He decided to just chuck him a burn for no reason. But anyways, so Mike Hanlon calls them, and it's not like in the movie where his wife is waiting for them to get done with dinner, or for him to come out for dinner, and he's writing excessively. They're barely waking up in the morning. He's got his robe on. Mike calls, and Bill really wants to let his wife Audra know everything. So unlike Eddie and who's the other that was married, Beverly, and they didn't really talk to their spouses about what was going on. They just said they had to leave. But Bill wants to kind of let Audra know everything. So he talks to her about Georgie, sits her down, tells her he has to leave, and he'll tell her as much as he could remember, because he really doesn't remember as much. Just when Mike called, it kind of like snapped in his brain. Not even hearing Mike's voice or name, but just when he said Derry, everything kind of flooded back. And the first thing that flooded back was Georgie. So he first tells her about how Georgie had died, and that he didn't just die, he was murdered. So he says, it happened right there on Witcham Street, not too far from the intersection with Jackson. Whoever killed him pulled his left arm off the way a second grader would pull a wing off a fly. Medical examiner said he either died of shock or blood loss. For as I could ever see, it didn't make a damn's worth of difference. So, little Georgie died of blood loss or shock from getting his arm pulled off. And if you remember, I know you guys probably seen the trailer from the new It. And in the original It, kind of looks like it might play out the same. They lure Georgie, and in chapter 1, they lure Pennywise lures Georgie to the sewer and just yanks his arm right off while he's struggling to get away. So now we know how he died, shock or blood loss. And Bill just kind of lets Audra know everything. She wants to go with him if he's going to go, and he loses it. He doesn't want her to go at all. He doesn't want her to think about Derry. He doesn't want her to speak about Derry. He's telling her that it's going to be a very dangerous place in the next couple of weeks or so. So he doesn't want her to go there all, and he does pretty much what it's in a movie. He's like, Papa, promise me. And so she promises, only because she doesn't want him to, he's struggling trying to say the words now. She doesn't want him to suffer that way. So she finally relents and promises. And I mean, it really talks a lot about their relationship and how close they are. And she was on drugs and like basically an alcoholic who partied all the time. When he met her and he saved her, and he really guided her to safety, and that's how they got themselves into a beautiful marriage. And that's why he feels like he owes it to her to at least tell her the truth of what he remembers. And she finally relents, like I said, and she says, "And when do I see you again?" she asked softly. He put an arm around her and held her tightly, but he never answered her question. So that's how the chapter ends, pretty much like the rest of them. They don't know if they're going to come back. They don't think that they're going to come back, but they're all going to fulfill the promise. And that's it for chapter 4. So in chapter 1, we had little Georgie meeting his demise in the year 1957. And in chapter 2, we had Adrian Mellon, the whole situation with the 3 bullies throwing him over the bridge, and Pennywise, of course, massacring him, and the 3 bullies taking the rap for that murder. And then we had, that happened in 1984, and then we have the phone calls happening in May 1985. So the end of chapter 3, the next part is called Derry, the First Interlude, because we haven't heard from Mike yet, because Mike has made all the phone calls, and it's basically going into details of what happened between, what happened with all of the rest of the Losers Club. So in the first interlude, it kind of covers what's going on in Mike's head since he stayed in Derry, and he sees everything that's still going on. It's in his perspective, it comes through as like a notebook, like he's writing notes. So that'll be the next one, Derry, the First Interlude. So I'll post that soon, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.